one of the reasons people love New Orleans is because there's a freedom of the people. There's a freedom that we love ourselves and we love our culture.
Hi, I'm Puck Lowe, a filmmaker, researcher, and writer. You're listening to The Next World, a podcast about building movements. Every month, we'll celebrate and be in conversation with the work being done by poor people's movements, especially in the U.S. We want to highlight organizing led by women, queer people, and people of color who are pushing forward new models of systemic change. Today, we're going to talk about home, homecoming, homegoing, returning, remaining. We're going to look to New Orleans as we enter hurricane season, and we're joined by the fabulous writer, visual artist, New Orleans born and bred, Kristina Kay Robinson. Welcome to the show, Kristina.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to get to talk to you, and I'm a huge fan of your writing.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for having me.
Maybe could you give a little bit of an update of what you're working on, what you're thinking about?
Right now, I'm kind of working on a few different things at once, which is sort of I'm learning is my creative style. I try to zero in on one thing, but I always have sort of a few different conversations that are kind of going on in my mind that I try to put out into the world in some form, whatever genre seems to suit the idea best. But I would say the main thing I'm working on right now is a project called Republica, Temple of Color and Sound. And it's sort of a multidisciplinary project that uses performance art and installation art to think about New Orleans and the overall Gulf Coast sort of on an alternative timeline. So it's a sort of speculative project about the past and the present and the future, thinking about if this portion of the country had taken a completely different political course than the rest of the country. So kind of envisioning this space as free territory and what would that look like. So I'm working on that, and I've sort of put it out into the world in various locations at this point, and it sort of mostly usually revolves around a large shrine and then me performing as a persona, which is sort of something new for me to do publicly at least, or try to do it publicly at least.
I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on, New Orleans is such a culturally specific place, and whenever I visit, I'm both always stunned by the beauty and also never know how to relate to this almost palpable sense of pain of displacement there, like everyone who should be there who was not there at the time. And it seems like a lot of your work is about figuring out what artists and culture workers can be doing. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what it means to be an artist from New Orleans working with those themes.
So, I don't know, it's really interesting being an artist in New Orleans right now, specifically a Black female artist in New Orleans. It's a very interesting position to be in. There's a way in which so many of the traditions and the cultural offering that the city has made to the whole country and the world that people come to partake in. So many of those things are rooted in Black women's cultural practice and aesthetics and all of these things that Black women have done on a daily basis for hundreds of years to create, cultivate, and support all of these institutions. It's interesting because we're not very well represented in the current arts landscape of the city, like as it functions now, post-Katrina. There is definitely, an underrepresentation of Black women from New Orleans in certain cultural institutions and public space. It's hard to account for those people, right? At the same time, Black women from New Orleans are also in, I feel, a state of production. There's never been a cease sort of in their production of their art, and whatever genre they may be working in. We have a lot of talented women who are doing well, sometimes outside of the city, but not very well here. And sort of that's the position that I find myself sort of in constantly. And it's very interesting to navigate kind of socially, professionally, and personally, that you can leave home and, maybe get a little bit traction, open doors maybe sometimes, but here it's still such an uphill battle.
Yeah, that makes me think about an essay that you wrote about going to Cuba in the summer of 2016 when you talk about, you quote Brent Hayes Edwards' The Practice of Diaspora, and you talk about this idea of décollage and how James Baldwin fled to Paris while at the same time Africans were struggling against French colonialism. And then you cite the work of Stuart Hall as well. I'm curious how you see, these sorts of historical moments resonate presently.
So in the fall of 2015, before I went to Cuba, I had this opportunity to do this work in northern Italy that, was a really great opportunity. The city was beautiful. The doors are sort of very open to you, even as a Black person, kind of strictly due to nationality, right? Which is a totally foreign experience to a person who grows up Black in America, right? So the experience something where you have a sort of leverage based on your nationality is it's kind of mind-boggling when you first encounter it. Something that was also going on in 2015, which was not the reason I went there, but became the actual part of the work I would do in the next few years, still continuing, is 2015 happened to be the deadliest year for migrants crossing the Mediterranean into Europe. And a large percentage of these migrants are continental Africans. So I'm interacting with people who are, Ethiopian, Eritrean, who might have been first and second generation, sometimes even third generation Italians, and now they are dealing with a brand new social interaction with their Blackness in Italy now because of the influx of migrants. And it totally changed the way I would have to interact with that state from there forward, right? So in the same way that once James Baldwin is in Paris and he's having all of these interactions with, the different parts of the diaspora that are there, and this is the thing that kind of propels him back home in some senses. So it was a very interesting experience in the sense of going to a country, experiencing a sort of bodily freedom of movement and just general treatment that you're not used to from growing up in the South, and encountering another state's form of racism, right?
I guess that makes me wonder, what do you think specifically the Black New Orleans diaspora from Katrina offers us in terms of lessons? Not only just as we, reckon with Puerto Rico and other climate change affected islands, but based on the connections you made when you were in Italy and that sense of diaspora, I think there's something so profound about the importance of returning to home in New Orleans that you write about as well.
That was 2015. That also happened to be this year of so many police murders that were highly, publicized, and we saw the videos, constantly all the time, heading into 2017 or 2016 when I was able to go do some writing in Cuba. It was sort of a similar situation of these very, very intense, violent things happening at home and seeing it play out in another place, and coming back home and I guess really feeling very different about the concept of home than I had previously by 2017, right, after some of these events have already happened. And so by 2017, and I would say that's a continuing feeling now, home is a very interesting concept now. You know, as the years go on, I guess I weigh what I'm connected to. Is it something that's living and breathing? Am I connected to nostalgia? Am I connected to grief at this point? And I mean that in the sense that after 2015, the gentrification also took off rapidly in New Orleans. Like, it had already been happening, of course, for 10 years, but there was a very rapid physical, visceral change in New Orleans that you're just now dealing with every day, right? Now things are just going to actually visually look very, very different in the city. And so you start to sort of lose your bearings a little bit as the economic and cultural arts landscape aligns around that. Your viability financially is very, very much in peril in New Orleans as a Black artist. So concepts around home are very, very interesting. It feels very amorphous right now in some senses. I don't know. I could feel differently last week. I might feel differently next week. But right now, considering certain things that are kind of happening on the ground and larger in the country, yeah, it feels extremely just not necessarily solid feeling of home that I counted on basically, always, in the sense of, even if you're not here, but just of being solidly from a place that you recognize, that you know, and people know you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's not necessarily like that anymore. It could be a liability at this point, having too much history in New Orleans as gentrification progresses. So it's an interesting question in terms of thinking about the question of returning and remaining,
So maybe this is a good time to bring on our second guest today, Ashana Bigard. She's a New Orleans native, education activist, organizer, and parent. And a lot of the work that you do fighting against charter schools and their legacy of colonization seem to be case in point to show what the structures day to day are that make life so hard to stay in New Orleans. Welcome so much to the show, Ashana.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. So, a lot of the work I do, I tell people I'm a native New Orleanian. I've been in New Orleans since forever. My family has been here since forever. I'm like a fifth generation New Orleanian. I was educated in public schools in New Orleans. And so are my children, and my children are ages 24, 12, and 7. And I suggest no one do that, because that's not a good idea. If you're going to have 3 children, have them all together. But because of that, and just the work I've been doing ever since I can remember, the education landscape has been very interesting. There's a post-Katrina education landscape and a pre-Katrina education landscape. And my oldest daughter went to school pre-Katrina and post-Katrina. And so I came back to a city expecting it to improve, because, of course, we did have a lot of problems, especially poverty. Poverty was one of our main problems. And, of course, we had white flight, which was disinvestment from public education many years prior to the storm. So we had a lot of school buildings that were like 100 years old. They had mice, they had rats, they had mold, just a lot of issues. But when we expected one type of improvement, another type of improvement, well, another type of thing happened. I won't say improvement, but we did expect improvement. When we first heard about the schools being taken over, we didn't necessarily think it was a good or a bad thing. We just thought, we're going to finally get money into our schools. Our teachers will finally get support. We'll finally get smaller class sizes, which were best practice. Of course, none of that really happened. They fired all of the Black teachers. They fired all of the teachers and all of the employees, and then they brought in Teach for America, which would be a great program if it was a teaching assistant program, right? If you were bringing people to assist teachers, but like 4 weeks of training, I don't care how smart you are. I'm like really smart. I tell this to people all the time. I'm really smart. But also, if you give me 4 weeks of training, you probably do not want me working on your car engine. you know. I mean, you could let me, but I wouldn't advise you drive it afterwards, you know. With 4 weeks of training. So the fact that you're working on my child's brain development, their brain synapses are forming between the ages of 4 and 8. And this is their critical learning stages, and you don't know anything about early childhood brain development, you probably shouldn't be the person teaching my child. But the really hard things that happen around New Orleans culture, just our very spirit surviving, was when they took all the music out of the schools, all of the arts. They took recess. Our kids had silent lunch, still do a lot of schools.
That's horrible.
Yeah, and so it's just been a real uphill battle, because what I feel like I've really been fighting is for just human dignity. And of course, there's a big divide line. So whenever there's only a few schools that have white, upper class, and middle class children in them of the charter schools. And most of those schools are schools that were here pre-Katrina that were also just as, actually, now they're more racially, they're more not representative of the city. So like you have Lusher. Lusher was like, before the storm was like 40% white, upper middle class, and after the storm it's like 70%, right? Yeah. Because you no longer have people regulating it. So we have several schools that are like that, but those are the only schools white children go to. And the rest of the schools are like 99%, 80 to 90% Black and brown. And even the brown children are segregated to certain schools because a lot of the schools, the charter schools, will not provide language access. They don't even have teachers that speak Spanish, much less the coordinators and the other programs they're supposed to have. So it's a very segregated system, and most of the schools that are 100% Black are schools that don't have that have silent lunches, no recess, no PE, no music program, no art program. And people don't understand how that's going to impact New Orleans culture later. Like all of the little jazz bands and stuff, the second line bands that they see in the French Quarter, a lot of those are high school kids who learn how to play music a lot of them in elementary school. I mean, some of them in elementary school, now some of them in some summer programs, but the more they weed those programs out, the less and less you'll have poor children even having access to music, arts. And the impact that's going to have on a city is going to be devastating. But even the impact of college, I don't know how many kids I went to high school with who got band scholarships to Southern and Grambling, right? They didn't come out as musicians, but it was their access to college. It was the entry point to college. And just the idea that you cannot greet each other or hug each other. I had a discipline case where there was a young lady who was consoling her friend. She was just rubbing her back because her brother had died like almost a week before. And the teacher was like, you're going to get a demerit for every second you touch her, every minute you touch her. And, the girl, she's in high school. She's like, well, you do what you're going to do. I'm going to do what I have to do. So she consoled her friend for the whole 90-minute period. They wanted to suspend her for 10 days for that. And they actually wrote on her papers, affection demerits.
Wow.
So the schools are becoming... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's so deep what you were saying about no art classes, no music classes, how that's going to change the culture. I'm curious, both of you, like what you think.
Sure. I mean, it's very interesting because growing up in New Orleans, I mostly was in school in the 80s, 90s. The cultural arts, the way they were supported by the people who taught in school, I don't know. It's not much has really, really been said or written or discussed about how much public school teachers were the instructors of all of these great people who we got to know, later in time as musicians or celebrities. But the teachers did so much to support the artistic, endeavors of students, because a lot of them were artists too. All of them got fired after Katrina, right? And these kind of social functions that were like talent shows and all of these things that were like the staples of me growing up. The people who performed in those things really did go on to be, musicians, artists, writers, all of these different people whose names we know today. And just knowing that, that access that you had to the arts in New Orleans was just unprecedented, I feel, in this country. Just you could really touch and talk to people who might be virtuoso in, multiple different instruments, and they were, the teacher at the end of the hallway. That doesn't exist anymore. And yeah, the impact that's going to have, it's sad to see. I hadn't been on French Street, New Orleans in forever, and I happened to be there last weekend, and I couldn't believe it. It was like Bourbon Street, and not even in the way that could be good. It was just terrible.
People who don't there.
French Street used to be a place where Black people played music on the street, and so there's still people who are there, but it's in a very confined and it's just in a very confined for tourist consumption space, where before it was much more interactive in the sense that, tourists would be there, but local people would be too. And sure, there are local people there, but the element of local people who would have been there because they lived across the street in the neighborhood right there, most of the people aren't there. A large chunk of people are still missing. So it's much more of a selling and a consumption in a much more obvious way now, where before there was an actual, generative cultural thing happening that tourists just got to see. You know what I mean? You just happen to be able to see that. If you paid your money to come to New Orleans, you could see this actual thing that was happening anyway.
Sure.
Now it's so confined to being a performance because they took us all of the music off the street, basically, as Ashana was saying earlier. And it's just it's wild to observe things change that way so rapidly.
Ashana, what you were saying before about how this is not new, I'm wondering if you can say more what you mean by that.
When I say it's not new, the closest comparison I would use is the reservation schools, except for the kids were taken out of their homes. But it's a close comparison only because the children are constantly told everything of them, of their culture, is wrong, right? So I had a second grader who I went to school because they were saying that he had a behavior disorder because he perpetually was not behaving. And it turned out what it was that he grew up when he's only second grade. So in his neighborhood lived his lunch lady. And every time he saw her, he would greet her. And sometimes when she was gone for a couple of days, and when then he saw her again, he ran up to her and he hugged her, right? Which was really against the school rules.
Oh.
But also that is a part of his culture. You can't live on a block with somebody and not say good morning, good evening, goodbye, how are you doing? How have you been? How have you been feeling? You can't do that. And so he was just being a child, a New Orleanian, and he apparently kept doing it. No matter how many times they punished him, he would not say good morning. He would not greet her. And it was a school he was supposed to be quiet and walk with his finger on his lips, and not say anything to anybody except for approved time. And this child just kept greeting her and other people. He couldn't do it. And he was constantly punished for it. And to the point where they said he had a behavior disorder. And I had to I said, no, this is his culture. And for you to try to push everything he is out of him will not help him in his own community,
Right.
And they were kind of like, well, when he walks through the school doors, he's a scholar. I said, no, when he walks through the school doors, he's a New Orleanian Black boy. You cannot. Why would you build a school in New Orleans not for children from New Orleans? That doesn't make sense to me. But, a lot of it, they have no awareness of, what is culturally appropriate to them. It's not what's culturally appropriate to us, nor the study of that is important. And so it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's horrible. I just feel so sorry for the children because it's like everything they are, they want to change, even how they greet each other, you know. And like, you have to just pay attention to your surroundings. We had a kid who got in trouble because he called he kept calling people baby. They said he was being I forgot what they said the word was, but it was on the lines of sexual harassment, but it wasn't sexual harassment exactly. And like, and so, you know, I've talked to him as a 14-year-old, and he was like, he's sorry. He said it just comes out his mouth. But he calls his cousins baby, his male cousins, and his friends baby. He called everybody baby, you know, which is a thing here. Some people call everybody baby. His daddy called everybody baby. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm wondering if you could just, for people who don't, you know all of what's happened with the schools since Katrina, if you could just break that down real quick. Like you mentioned, you know, like, who are these people, and they don't know the culture.
Okay, yeah. So they passed a law called Act 35, and they raised the score of a failing school to 87 when the score for a failing school was a 60, so they could take over the majority of schools. They took over those schools, and then the state did, and they created something called the Recovery School District. The Recovery School District, all they did was starve the schools of resources and constantly switch out administration and switch out teachers, so the schools would be failing, so then they could give them to charter management organizations. Those charter management organizations do not have to be proven to be quality or good. Literally, all they had to do was want to start a school. And in the legislation, it is literally an experiment. In the legislation, they have the word experiment 5 times. So they are experimenting on our children, and they did not get the parents' permission to do it. I wish I had the legislation right in front of me, because I usually do, but I don't today. But literally, it is an experiment. So they are allowing people to do things that they know are not best practices. They know are not in they're not in alignment with what is good for children. I mean, especially when you talk about silent lunches and no recess, when you don't allow small children to talk, you're going to cause them to have social emotional problems. And then, of course, we know if they have social emotional delays and social emotional problems, then they're going to say they have antisocial behavior. Antisocial behavior is linked to criminal behavior. But, you know, 84% of public school children in New Orleans are Black. And 86% are free and reduced lunch. So we're talking about mostly Black poor children. So people don't really care. That's the bottom line. Because the things that are happening to these kids in schools, I can't even tell you how many meetings I've sat on when schools wanted to do non-disclosure agreements because of how many children have been abused in these schools. And when I say abused, I mean like punched in the mouth, choked, sexually assaulted, and not by other students. By people who worked at the schools. But again, I'm only one person, but I've sat in on so many non-disclosure agreements after lawsuits were filed. And because we don't have an overarching school district, we have almost 60 school districts, right? There's nobody counting how many. And some of the teachers we had a teacher that was just at one school and choked a young lady and then was hired by another school, right? So like that kinds of stuff happens. And a lot of these teachers are not certified as teachers. They're not real teachers. A lot of them come through programs like Teach for America and Teach NOLA, which are 4-week training programs for people who have other degrees. And the charter schools pretty much get to do what they want. And in fact, a lot of them do not follow state and federal laws. And I know this because, again, I go in them all the time. But the impact it has on the community is it makes them feel powerless. If I can't even protect my own child, if I put my child in 5 different schools and all of those schools were on some level abusive of my child, but I'm too poor to afford private school, then what are my options, right?
Yeah, and they have such wildly different assessments of children. So having interacted with children who at one school, you know, were labeled with a disorder, at another school it was this, at another school that, you know, there's nobody who, like you said, is actually trained to do what it is that they're doing. I had experience with students where one of their teachers passed away, and the school administration was trying to refuse to let the children memorialize the teacher when we're talking about culture, which of course all of these children got in trouble because of course they're going to do it anyway. That's what people in New Orleans do. Somebody passes away, they erect some sort of, temporary memorial, and they were trying to tell the students they couldn't do that on the school grounds. And it was just, one of these episodes of really like, I couldn't believe it was just such an attempt to me to sort of crush the spirit of children who are already grieving so heavily. I was like, wow, like what is really the end goal here? Like Ashana said, it's not new, but it's very, it's frightening to watch children actually go through a whole education experience and not get to experience what that is, because they are being experimented on, which is I'm glad, you said it that way, because that's exactly what it is.
And I want to see, one of the things I wish that people who are new to this city, though, will realize the long-term impact. Like, you don't have to care about Black people. You don't have to care about Native New Orleanians, but understand that the long-term impact of you stomping out our culture and pushing us out of our own city, the long-term impact is you're going to lose money, because people are not going to come from Paris to get LA food and LA culture. They could go to LA. LA got beaches and cool weather. I tell people that all the time. Like, people don't come here to experience LA and New York. They come here to experience New Orleans, and New Orleans is its people. Its people is its culture and its food. We're the people who talk to people on the corner that we don't know. People from LA and New York are not going to do that. They don't even want to make eye contact a lot of times, So that. Like, if you're building a business, a home, a life here, and you want to continue to make money, that if you don't value Black people and Black culture for no other reasons, value it for your long-term money, your goals.
I mean, I guess since we're going to close up in a second, it seems like the charter schools are just such a metaphor for how New Orleans is being treated overall.
But, for sure. Definitely.
Like, it's it's almost more helpful to see it in a way that is so specific, but it just, like, that is how New Orleans is being treated. But
there's definitely a little like microcosm of how people are being treated, just to something of thinking about, like, the Black female educator or Black female artist who's also an educator. I know women, excellent educators, excellent artists who were completely maligned within the context of a charter school, like trying to function there as a teacher. If you are, within this landscape with other people who've had this 4-week training, and they were, of course, most of them fired, run out of there, harassed, just mistreated to the point where you have to do something else. And, they're in there trying to be a Black teacher, who's a real teacher in the school, trying to stick it out, and then it becomes, detrimental to their health,
Yeah.
And so, it is really, it's really unfortunate.
And I have to say this, for the artists who I know who have attempted to work in schools, I mean, artists who literally get paid a lot more money, like they're doing this with their time, and they could do other things where they're making a lot of money with their time. Charmaine Neville was turned around at a school when she went to go volunteer at a school. Sunny was turned around at a school when she went to go volunteer at a school. Like, we have brilliant, incredible, world-famous artists who go to the school in their neighborhood to volunteer because they care about our children, we care about our community, and they are turned around. So they're not wanted or needed.
And I guess just to close out, does any of your new work deal with some of these things at all, Kristina, or is there anything that, Ashana, you can think of?
So part of what the speculative and the persona project is about also is this thing that I call the Temple of Color and Sound. And what it is the shrines that go up are essentially portable, right? They can go up anywhere. So it was me trying to think about displacement and gentrification and where is a place that some of these conversations and some of this exchange, this practice, whatever it is, whether it's a performance or we're just rehearsing or we're reading or we're having conversations we can't have anymore in certain places, I wanted this kind of portable temple to be a place for that. And so it's just my way as an artist of saying, like, okay, if I say I'm going to do this exhibit, I want it to be something that's communal and interactive and open to participation with, everybody that I know that's here. Because there's just so many places that, aren't available to you anymore, basically. They're just to sit down and talk in a group. It's like, where's that?
Definitely.
You know what I mean? Where can we go do that now? And it's like, just
let them do it in a
simple thing,
Yeah.
That is definitely missing. So that's how I'm dealing with it in my work right now. Yeah.
And so, and I write about it for Progressive magazine. So progressive.org. I write for a thing called Public School Shakedown, and so I write articles there. And I mean, I don't write as much as I should. And now I've started to make a series of satire like shorts about it, where I just go completely the other way ham with my little character. So that's the position I feel like I'm in right now, because oftentimes when you're trying to use like common sense and, logic, statistics, best practices, no one wants to hear that. So you have to take it to this extreme level, because they've the kids in cages thing is very serious, but they've been locking Black children in cages since forever. Let's not talk about the war on drugs and how many children were thrown into group homes at very young ages, were raped, molested, all kinds of horrible things happen to them. But then let's talk about the cages of the mind that's happening right now with the children who are in these schools, who are told not to talk, not to hug, not to communicate. 10 hours a day, they are literally told they cannot talk to each other. They can't show any affection to each other. They can't even play with each other. Like, what is that doing to small children's minds? Anyway, and this is happening to Black and brown children across the board, but New Orleans is like, if America has a cold, New Orleans has pneumonia, right? I feel like we're a concentration of things good and bad, and the good things we're losing. And I wish people understood that one of the reasons people love New Orleans is because there's a freedom of the people. There's a freedom that we love ourselves and we love our culture, and that we can be loving and free with other people. But if you crush that doesn't just hurt us. That hurts other people who come here and get to feel that sense of freedom. So the reason we can accept you is because we can accept ourselves. And Black people are not supposed to be accepting of themselves, right? Because we're under all this oppression. But our culture allowed us to continue to do that and gave us that permission to be free and love ourselves when the rest of the world was saying whatever they wanted to say. We were loved within our own village. So I don't know. I feel like we're losing it, but it's not just a loss to me. It's a loss to the world. And I wish people understood it on that level.
Right.
The reason you love this city is you're killing it.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Kristina, where can people see your work?
So I post most of the updates about what I'm doing, mostly on Instagram at this point, just because it's easier with information in some regards. So my Instagram is @YoungGypsyChild, sort of another alias. But yeah, that's where you can catch updates about where I might be performing or building a shrine or hosting a gathering or a talk. And KristinaKayRobinson.com too. That's easy. Just go there and see whatever it is.
Ashana.
Well, you can go to my Facebook, Ashana Bigard. Everything, mine is probably Ashana Bigard, but progressive.org, they can see my writing. I don't do as good as posting my videos, but I'm going to try to do better. On all my different stuff. I also have a website, which is also just my name. It's just like AshanaBigard.com. But progressive.org has this public school shakedown. It's not just me. It's a whole bunch of incredible writers writing all over the country about the privatization of education. So please check that out. Yeah. They get the chance. And I should be doing some videos that'll be pretty funny in the next month or so. So
Awesome.
Sad, but funny. Sad, very sad, but funny.
To close out today's show, our Minute of Resistance. We Know This Place, a poem from Sonny Patterson.
So we know this place, for we have glanced more times than we'd like to share into eyes that stare with nothing there behind them but an unfulfilled wish and an unconscious yearning for life, though death rests comfortably beside us at night, their moans are louder. They come to visit the guards at the gate and they stay until morning, torturing their guilt-written insides. The silent cries of the keepers are louder than the booms that come from the guns they use to occupy the space. And we know this place, for we have seen more times than we'd like to imagine. Bloated cadavers, floating through waters of a city gone savage. Forage in the land for what can be salvaged, but what can be saved when all is lost. It happened in August, 29 days in. We are now 5 days out of the only place we knew to call house and home. Few things are certain. 1, we have no food. 2, there are more bodies lying at the roadside than hot plates being distributed, or first aid being administered, or recognition as a citizen. 14th Amendment, X. Refugee, check. And we know this place. It's ever-changing, yet forever the same. Money and power and greed, the game. They suck and devour the souls of the slain. Oh, what a feast for the beast at their table of shame, with napkins round necks to catch the blood that drains from the flesh they chew. Oh, it's held again, and we know this place, all too well. Dank with the smell of death and doom. It hovers, it smothers. No growth, no room, no pretty, no please. Just gray, just gloom. Just borned me a hope and it died too soon. Just jucking, just jiving, just living. Oh, we just fools. And we know this place. It's decked in all its array and splendor. Golden streets with good intentions. Capture our attention, their gadgets and inventions. Pesticide the food supply, flu-like symptoms. Diabetic condition, a cancer in the system. Health on hold, it's a pistol to the temple. Go run to the churches. Tell Reverend it's simple. Good works and good deeds is what equals redemption. But tell me, please, Jesus never mentioned how the churchmen get extensions on freedom while children are being fondled from the altar to the streets, then back to the sanctuaries. Oh, it's kind of scary, ain't it, to know that both the prophet and the priest practice deceit, then come to the people and claim peace, peace. They come to the people and claim love, love, but oh, where is the peace, Where is the love? Where is that balm in Gilead that can heal the wounded soul or make the half-man whole? I swear we know this place, because we have vowed before never again to return, but oh, here we are. We back in the desert, dry mouth and thirsting for waters from heaven. But come, children, rally round, and maybe together we can make a sound that'll shake the trees or rattle the ground, make strong our knees. We's a freedom bound, and we know this place, Reclaim the crown, hold on to the prize, never put it down, be firm in the stance, no breaks, no bows. Gotta forward on mamas, make your move now. Forward on babas, make your move now. Forward, dear children, because freedom is right now.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of The Next World, a podcast about building movements. You can find out more about all of the issues we talked about today at nesri.org. That's nesri.org. Thank you to Jesse Strauss for sound mixing. Keep building, and see you next time.